Industrialization of Agriculture in India and the Impact of COVID, August 3rd, 2021. For a few decades now, we in India have witnessed what the St. Lewisian economist Sir William Arthur Lewis characterized and which later came to be known as the dual sector model or the Lewis model of development. In terms of its premises, it is fairly straightforward. A developing economy, such as India, will reach a point in its historical development where increasing surplus labor in agriculture does not add any value to the marginal profit made by that sector. There may be a number of reasons for this, but principally there are two main factors. One, increasing investment and use of machinery leading to the industrialization of farmlands means that there is a diminishing requirement for laborers in total in agriculture. This is statistically noticeable even in our recent history. From 2009 to 2019, the proportion of the population employed in agriculture has reduced from 52.5% to 42.6%. Agriculture for the last 2 decades as a sector has not been gaining in terms of its contribution to the GDP. Though this trend seems to have been arrested somewhat in 2021 when it once again reached 20% after a period of 17 years. Kapil 2021. This is undoubtedly due to the lockdown enforced to tackle COVID and is unlikely to sustain itself. 2. Even when migrations do not take place due to the above mentioned factors, they effectively ensure that the marginal product of labor is zero or even negative in agriculture, leading to situations of disguised unemployment. In essence, this leads to a situation where there is an increasing glut of surplus labor in the agricultural sector, which has historically migrated to urban areas to seek employment in industries. In 2001, the number of migrants who moved from rural areas to urban centers in India stood at 51 million. By 2011, this number rose to 78 million. Historically, in the near and long term, with the progressive mechanization of agriculture and greater trade between nations, leading to a diminished dependency on domestic agricultural products, this number is bound to increase. These premises point to a conclusion that urban areas can bank with some certainty on an influx of labor power from rural areas. This would also mean that as more people move into cities, the demands in those cities for basic necessities, food, shelter, transportation, etc., is bound to increase. This would mean an upward trend in the demand for products and services, i.e., commodities, in these areas. The increasing number of laborers would also mean that the supply of labor power could be used to suppress wages by capitalists and in turn keep the prices of their commodities low and competitive. To be noted, however, Lewis observed that apart from the influx of labor power and the changes that means for industry, industry itself does autonomously lead to an expansion of demand. This is usually a result of changes in consumer taste, government purchases, or expansion into international markets, these being indexes of the health of an industry. The bottom line that the Lewisian model rests on, however, that without any segregation of the labor power that enters cities from rural areas, i.e., treating all of them as homogeneous and unskilled, the supply of labor from the country to the city is potentially unlimited or completely elastic. On a side note, it should be stated that Lewis originally classified the two sectors as capitalist and subsistence. The key facet characterizing the relationship between these two sectors is the supply of surplus labor power to urban industries from rural agriculture. What facilitates this tendency is the extent of disguised unemployment which persists in agriculture. This may include, but is not limited to, agriculture itself, but also domestic services, casual jobs, petty retail, and trading. Also note how such a tendency does complement the drive within capitalism to mechanize low skill and easily reproducible occupations. A cashier today is almost universally replaced by a transaction interface linked to your bank via Google Pay or some other service on virtually every website selling anything. Hence, we may also notice that the contribution to the disguised unemployment may now be rising among the ranks of the urban industries as well, particularly in the light of increasing developments in production and sales processes, better tuned to the demands of the market. In essence, and in rounding up, the situation serves the interests of capital in general, but industry in particular, as the supply of unskilled or semi-skilled labor to industry holds down industrial labor costs. Let me repeat this. As the supply of unskilled or semi-skilled labor to industry holds down industrial labor costs in wages, more laborers lead to higher demands in these areas as well, while the suppressed wages allow for competitive prices of commodities and profits for the capitalist. At this stage, even the industrial capitalist would be incentivized to plow back profits into industrial capital formation. This would be equally the case in strictly reproductive labor, the purchase and consumption of milk bottles and diapers for babies, etc. As is evident, such developments, which are not merely industrial but trace a rural to urban migration, leading to a concentration of populations in urban centers, whether of workers or capitalists, leads to a necessity for further industrialization of such centers to provide for the labor power. Someone who has been following the argument here will note that this is a very strong tendency. This is only reversed or stagnated when the marginal product of both sectors is approximately equal. For this to happen, agricultural productivity would have to rise dramatically, often only accomplishable via the introduction of mechanization and perhaps the collectivization of landholdings. It would be interesting to trace precedents to this trend in India. Sikhism, for instance, started as a largely agrarian revolt against landlords, Khushwant Singh, 1971, as did the Naxalbari movement. Communist governments in West Bengal and Kerala have, in their history, introduced land redistribution on limited scales. Yet, even for farm produce in ever greater volumes to find a market, transportation and storage mechanisms would have to be widely developed, the latter of which is sorely undeveloped in India. Rajesh Trichur Venkateshwaran, 2018. Amidst this backdrop and questions regarding essential services which cannot be shut down, this would necessarily be prioritized. What does it mean for urban centers, however, where the effects and casualties of coronavirus are most reported? As stated, we have witnessed a hiccup in the usual dual sector model, forcing a massive reverse migration from urban to rural areas, drastically changing the labor market. Not much is known about the scale of this, however, as the government in India has not tracked it or collected data. Yet, it may be noted that as of the 3rd of August 2021, there is some data on a state-wise inoculation conducted, even a breakup of the percentiles of its administration among urban and rural areas. With no data on the reverse migration, however, we have no way of knowing whether these campaigns have had any success in halting or reversing the model. Reversing in the sense of reversing the so-called exception of the influx into the rural areas, the reverse migration. It is to be expected, however, that as the economy progressively opens up, we will see this come to light. Notes. According to the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers' Welfare, as per the Census 2011, conducted by the Registrar General of India, the total number of agricultural workers in the country have increased from 234.1 million, consisting of 127.3 million cultivators and 106.8 million agricultural laborers in 2001 to 263.1 million, consisting of 118.8 million cultivators and 144.3 million agricultural laborers in 2011. In terms of the proportion of the population employed in agriculture, as per 2018, agriculture employed more than 50% of the Indian workforce and contributed 17 to 18% of the country's GDP. Thanks.